We're just about all here. Yep. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started then, because these 20 minutes go quickly. So I'm gonna try and do a relatively quick presentation and kind of run through COVE tool and kind of the features of it, and then try and turn it over to questions and answers so you guys get what you really want to know known. So a little bit about my experience with COVE tool. So we have been looking into it at Big Salt for the last couple of months and working with their development team to see if it would be a proper fit for our environmental process in our office. So some of the things kind of about COVE tool is it is cloud-based, which is great. It's very fast, unlike some other environmental environmental tools to environmental tools. It's been on the market for a couple of years, but they're quickly developing and changing it. So they're very much open to new ideas and making it all the more useful to everyone using it. It pulls from Rhino and Revit in a very easy way and can be, you know, it can fit well into a design process easily. So I'm going to go into a little bit of some of the features quickly. The way I kind of view COVE tool is it has kind of three distinct areas in which it works. So the first that it really does well is it puts out a great climate analysis for your site. You put in where your building is going to be located, and it puts out this kind of client-ready PDF with kind of a lot of the information that you need based on where you are. And this really helps not only going into a client meeting, but also let you make decisions based on all the information without having to go far or alter it in order to how it looks. So that's kind of the first element that's kind of paired with the ability to do a daylight and shadow analysis. So they have, they run both. So this daylighting analysis is said to be able to be used for LEED. They haven't had anyone do it. I think they have a project currently in the process of getting a point for LEED for it, but it does meet all of the requirements. And along with this, they also have a shoebox model that you can see on the bottom. And this is mostly a study kind of window to wall ratio as well as shading devices. All of these can be used to further study in your EUI, or you can use kind of your original base model you brought in. So the shoebox can translate into a better understanding in EUI or the impact it would have, but doesn't have to. And so one of the really nice aspects of this is that they actually have a context built in once you put your location in, so you don't actually have to build up any context surrounding your building to get an understanding of shadows and the impacts you'll have on your site. And it produces, this is kind of the interface that you're seeing here. And it's, you know, it's a very clean, easy way to work through some different questions you might have. So the second kind of basket of things that, in my opinion, kind of hits is this baseline energy. And this is producing kind of your EUI that we talk so much about with DDX, which this can translate directly to. So this EUI is based off one of their 8 use types that they have preset. They have a whole bunch of different options online in their FAQ, or they will work with you to do other use types if that's necessary. You can do multi-use buildings. They have up to 3 use types per building. It's currently their limit. And it'll produce this baseline, which is based both on code, wherever your building is, as well as whatever the use type is. So it brings these both together. And here you can see it produces your EUI, compares it to 2030, and also breaks down where this energy is being used throughout the building. They also have this kind of red, yellow, green light that you can see down here, which is suggesting changes that you could make that would benefit your building most likely. So you might see the occupancy sensors are currently set to no sensors. This is suggesting that putting in sensors would be beneficial to your energy usage. So this creates kind of a baseline understanding of how your building will work. From here, you can export a PDF of your building's performance as well. This is a little bit less useful, in my opinion, to bring to clients, but it still has use in understanding how your building is working. And you can also compare different buildings. So this is just kind of like a dumb study I did. You can put in pictures, and it also goes into further information further down this comparison. So it allows you to do quick massing studies between different buildings if you would like. And then the last kind of large element that COVE tool has is this optimization ability. So the way they're optimizing is you can pick which of these kind of categories that you have on the top here, and you can pick different elements in that and compare them, both the cost and their energy impact on your building. So that might be picking different R values that you compare against each other, whether it be roof or wall, and see whether or not the cost of putting these in is worth the amount it'll pull down your EUI, or just have an understanding of their overall impact on the building performance. And then a little bit of a last thing before we jump into kind of questions is their really strong database of documentation. So they have a large section on their website that is devoted to kind of, they call them FAQs, but it's both documentation on how to better use the tool, a little bit of just about kind of understanding environmental modeling in general, as well as kind of new use types or other kind of tips that they've come up with. So at this point, I'm gonna switch over to question and answer unless people would like me to get more in depth about the tool.
So one question would be, when you talk about the different building types and how they break out lighting and other energy source areas, is that based on a generalized input for an office building or a lab or a hospital, or is that based on your individual inputs and you really have to understand how to manipulate the tool?
So that is based on a general input that they pre-fill all of these categories with on this kind of baseline energy page. All of these are adjustable. So if you have an understanding of how your building may act differently than their baseline, you can absolutely go in here and do this, but they are using their best knowledge for a project and how it will perform. So it's a bit of both is the answer. It can be. But they also do have this daylight, or these kind of green, red, and yellow to give you some guidance. But one thing about that is it's not, this kind of green, red, and yellow light is not location-based. So it might not always be appropriate in some settings. You know, northeast versus southwest, you might not same green light as you would in a different place. So there is some knowledge needed.
Kieran, that optimization tool diagram looks very interesting with the vertical lines and then all the diagonals interconnecting for, apparently it's showing dozens of different possibilities. That take a little getting used to sort of sort out, or can you say, well, follow a certain cost parameter and show me what'll happen, that kind of thing?
So it's similar in a lot of ways to Design Explorer. If anyone's used that for kind of the Ladybug suite, you can either select, I can't do this because it's not an active website, but you could select an element. And I believe you can even select a single strand and see how it's interacting. So I think I'm pretty sure if you select this, like down here, it'll show you the strand and how it interacts all the way across this chart. Which you can see these are actually also relating to it. So this one, which is lighting LED, is going to pass through this node. So you can kind of make it up a little bit, but you can select. So if you wanted to, you wanted an EUI that was at the lower, you could select these couple and see what they are doing.
Oh, okay.
And it'll highlight those. Yep.
If you pick an EUI on the right end, it'll highlight the paths that'll get you to that EUI. Wow.
Exactly. Yes.
And as a follow-up, do you get, so defining what those different options are, so like on the left, the different R, roof R values, you get to define if there are 2 of those or 3 of those in your,
Yeah.
in that portion. So you could say, okay, I want to look at the ones with lower, the bottom half of that slice, and it'll filter.
That is correct. And when you put in these options, there is an ability to either use some that they have predetermined in this kind of options for optimization. They might have a couple R values for roofs already input. This may or may not be appropriate to what you're doing. So it's something that's in there, but requires scrutiny when moving forward. And I forgot what I was going to say, but, and along those lines, the costs that you're seeing here are generally costs that they have received from manufacturers. So they don't necessarily represent labor costs. You could work with a cost estimator to get more accurate cost numbers if that was something that was very important to you.
I would think the cost predictions are good for relative information, not for a hard number. Right.
Yes, I would say that's very much probably true.
We have other questions?
Great.
I think you've left people speechless. I guess.
All right. I mean, I can go into it a bit more if that would be helpful. A little bit more behind it.
Yeah.
Sure.
So when you start off with COVE tool, there's only a couple of necessary inputs to get going. The only things that you put in are your model, if you have one. You can also do it manually, which just gets into numbers. So your model, your location, and the name. And that's really it. It'll self-select a code for you based on that kind of knowledge. And that'll put you directly into this climate tool, which is obviously location-based. They pull the closest, weather file from you. So if that's a issue they have at this point, they don't have the ability to do a custom weather file, but you can work with their tech department if you want to put one in, and they are happy to do that. That's something they're looking at for the future. If anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to stop me too. And so a little bit kind of about their daylighting. I believe at this point they're currently using 2 to 3 bounces to get their daylighting. You have some ability to adjust the test point size, so you can get faster models. This is probably the element that takes the longest to run. It takes usually a couple of minutes compared to everything else, which is, a couple, 30 seconds to a minute, sort of. The optimization can also take a little while, depending on the number of variables that you're using. This will give you an idea of, the amount of daylighting. They also do glare. It's useful as much as that can be useful, and the fact it highlights areas that there might be a problem. But obviously, it doesn't take into account everything that something like Diva or like a proper tool that a consultant would do. So it has its uses, but it's not necessarily a replacement in that case for a consultant. The shoebox model is actually developed by kind of aggregating the different elements of your building. So it'll take all of the faces that face north and produce, a 30% window and wall ratio as a base. And that allows you to kind of test that and see how that works. One issue with this is it doesn't necessarily account for self-shading of the model or other context shading in the shoebox model, as they generally don't. But as they're pulling your kind of window to wall ratio, it might become a more apparent issue than if you're doing a proper shoebox model that you would do in other programs. The context modeling is really nice. You can delete buildings around yours. You can change their height if something's changing and you know it. So it's a very useful tool. Yeah, and so you can see they have a couple different analyses up there. You can also turn on and off kind of all of the elements down here, which are things like walls, shading devices, your roof. So you can kind of vary a lot what you're seeing through any of their daylighting analysis. Yeah.
Kieran, with the daylighting analysis, so it shows a variety of window openings. If you select, say, the least amount of windows and you get a good amount of daylight, will that then translate into the energy model use output? So you make a decision here. Shows up. Good. Okay.
So basically, there's kind of two ways when you start on COVE tool. You can either choose to go down the kind of 3D model input or the kind of quote unquote manual input. So if you choose the manual input, which kind of takes all your information as it would for an EUI, but if you alter anything in your shoebox model, you can then run it through the rest of the, so if you want to adjust the window to wall ratio or the shading devices, you can then run that through the rest. So it's an easy way to kind of understand its impact. Does that make sense?
Good. Yeah.
But the one thing it won't do is it won't, so basically the 3D model is used mostly for the full building kind of daylight analysis you're seeing at top. It does not have the ability to pull from the shoebox model and go back into that, if that makes sense. So but you can adjust the window to wall ratio in that. So those two don't speak to each other, but I don't see why that couldn't be something they can change in the future. That's like a little confusing, getting a little into the weeds, perhaps. Are there any other questions? No? Okay, well, I'll go into the baseline a little bit. So kind of as we talked about, they pull from either usually ASHRAE and code, and then you can go in and alter them. This is the one place where having some knowledge or understanding of what's typical for what you're doing is useful. It might also be where you start to work with you know, engineers or other people involved in this project to get kind of a very specific understanding if that's where you are. As a kind of, you know, early phase, there's not a huge need to adjust these elements. But as you're getting into things where elements are starting to be defined and you really want to get a good idea, that's where you can start kind of coming in and starting to adjust these numbers as appropriate. And this is kind of something, these kind of numbers are something that you will see in every pretty much energy model where you can change, and many will pull defaults or basic understanding kind of numbers in to give you an idea. And these are kind of the graphics that'll follow you throughout the whole thing, these kind of, this top row up top. And so that gives you an ability to understand where you might want to focus. So in this building, the lighting might be a place where you'd focus, working with a consultant or an engineer to pull that down. Yeah, and so this is just the report that puts out a lot of that. The ability to compare is helpful, obviously, for early phase, you know, conceptual and schematic design in order to bring that down. And then the optimization, which is something that they tout, but does take a bit more time and probably understanding to, you know, potentially use it to as much as you could. There's a baseline to which you could absolutely use it, but having an understanding of appropriate R values, for example, is something where it comes in use. I would suggest if anyone has any other questions, they have a free trial available on their website for 15 days. If you work, they'll probably be happy to work with you to extend that if necessary. There's a large, you know, catalog of questions that have already been asked that are great. They have some good videos, and they do a webinar every, I think, Wednesday. That's like an hour long during lunch. But in general, they're highly responsive. So I recommend reaching out. You can also reach out to me if you have any other questions as well that come up.
Great, thank you. We do have 58 seconds left. So if there's any more questions, I have one if no one else has one, which is, and I can sort of sneakily bring in a question from the last session. You talked a little bit about whether to model whether to make a specific analysis model for this or whether you can use your Revit model. Do you have any thoughts on that you might want to share?
Yeah, so we found in our office that there was not a strong, didn't necessarily need to make a very like airtight model in order to model this, but we did end up often detaching a model or saving a separate one. The Revit pulls directly from your family types. So if you have that set up, you're usually pretty good. And Rhino is also very basic. It's just a quick script. So it's very easy to pull in and use and work into a design process.
Thank you. See
Thanks,
you on the
all.
other side, guys.